Hey everybody, welcome to DIY Hi-Fi. Today we're going to be building the MKBoom portable Bluetooth speaker by Parts Express. There's going to be a few twists, a few turns, and a lot of fun in between, so stick around to the end. I hope to see you there. Let's get right into it. So this kit is going to come with everything we need to build it from start to finish. On our right we've got our pre-assembled crossover boards. Next to that we've got our flat pack. We've got our AC adapter, we've got port tubes, we've got fasteners, our tweeter and mid-range, we've got some standoffs. This includes the batteries, and then we've got our amp board, our battery board, and everything else we need to get this thing put together. Okay, so we've got Parts Express website pulled up here. We've got all our parts laid out for our kit. We've got our batteries, our converter, our flat pack, our woofers, our tweeters. Our crossovers are going to be pre-assembled here. Unfortunately, we don't get to do any soldering. We've got our amp board, our back panel, some gasketing, everything we need to build the kit. We've even got our port tubes, battery casing here. So let's go ahead and look at our tweeter here. So we've got a really narrow or really small diameter dome tweeter here. And I think the reason that they've chosen this is we know that the smaller diameter of your dome, the wider the dispersion. So that's going to be really good for off-axis response. And then we'll go ahead and look at our woofer here. Nice beefy little Dayton woofer. These never disappoint. These play pretty low, so no problems there. I'm glad to have this in the kit. So let's go ahead and jump right into it and get our hands dirty. So here I've just kind of mocked up the cabinet. I always like to give a dry run before I start to glue and clamp these sorts of things. It's generally fine, but you never know what sort of mistakes might have been made. I have run into them, so always a good rule of thumb to just take a minute, fit all your panels together, do a dry run, and then start your glue up. So this glue up is pretty straightforward. The material is so thin that we're not really going to be nailing very often. I'm going to be clamping most of this, so I'm just going to apply a generous amount of Titebond 3. You can probably get away with using any Titebond. I just have this on hand, so don't worry about that too much. The most important thing is that we do not glue our top panel on, as we're going to need to access all the internal cavities at the same time. We're not going to be able to fish everything through by hand like you may in a 2 or 3 way. We've got this internal cavity which is separated, which is going to house our amp board, our control board, and our battery pack. So we've got to be able to access that one last time after inserting everything, so we don't want to attach our top panel right at this moment. With that said, this is a really basic glue up. Everything is rabbited, so it makes it really easy to understand where all your panels go. So just take your time if you need to lay it out and think it out before you clamp it. But otherwise, just follow the instructions, glue and clamp, let it rest for a while, and then at that point you're probably ready to go ahead and start working on your electronic side while you wait on this glue up to dry and cure. So now at this point we're ready to start with our modules. We're going to take this one wire at a time and feed them into our back panel first. I did try to follow a few guides, but they differed from the instructions, so I'm not going to give you a step-by-step. I'm going to show you attaching all of the leads, but I don't want to tell you exactly where they go, as a few of the videos I watched differed from my instructions. I'm not sure if that's something to do with a change in the amplifier board itself, or just a change in the instructions. It's hard to say exactly, but read the instructions. I wound up going with what mine said rather than the videos that I watched, and mine seems to work just fine, so follow that same method and you'll be just fine. The volume knob is the only one that's got a key, so line that up. That's going to help you correctly adjust your volume. Tightening down all of our indicator lights here. These don't need to be bared down on, but just get them nice and snug so that they don't rattle off in the future. They've all got a little retaining washer there, so that's going to help keep them snug. Here we're attaching the cable for our volume control. This is a connector. We're going to plug that into our board next. This is our battery cable that we've got here. This is going to go directly into our battery board. We're going to work on that last. Now I've got all my connections made. I'm going to take a second to stop and zip tie all of this rat's nest so that I can keep a handle on it. And at that point, I'm going to go ahead and start my standoffs. I'm going to use the long ones first. This is going to give us separation. For the crossover, we're going to need to go ahead and clip the input leads. And I'm going to go ahead and tin the wire that's on the end of them. We're going to need to make a connection through the enclosure itself directly to the board. So I'm going to go ahead and tin my leads here. Now it's time to go ahead and glue our crossovers into place. Where you're seeing me glue mine is a little bit too far forward, so I would recommend going into one of the back corners. You do want to make sure you still have enough wire to reach inside the cavity where you're going to ultimately connect everything, and then you're going to want to seal these little holes here where we fed our wires through. You can see that I've made the connection from this black cable, which will plug into our board directly into our crossover. This is the only real modification you have to make to the electronics. I'm just going to go ahead and zip tie everything up in here and get it all cleaned up. Now I'm ready to attach my amp board to my back plate. We're going to use standoffs for the second layer, and that's where our battery pack is going to attach. And I'm going to go ahead and get that plugged in at this point. We'll go ahead and tighten it down. And we're pretty much done with this. So before we start our finishing process, I'm going to go ahead and protect my components by masking off all of my openings here. This only takes a second and it keeps the dust out of everything. We don't have to worry about what goes on the outside. So now before we start our finishing process, we're ready at this point with all of our crossovers and power lines connected to go ahead and glue on the top of our enclosure. We're going to glue this and let it set for the same amount of time. And then I'm going to hit it with some 120 just to smooth out all my edges because I'm going to start to veneer this next. So for this, I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm going to use some self-adhesive 3M branded. This is maple veneer. I'm just going to press this on firmly and then I'm going to give it a good roll so that we've got adhesion all the way across. Pressing down as hard as I can. Then I'm going to take a trim router with a flush cut bit and trim off my edges. This makes it really easy and really quick. This maple is rock hard and very brittle, so you want a sharp blade for this. I'm just going to take the same flush trim bit and cut out my speaker openings here. At this point, we're ready to lay the base coat of lacquer. This is a semi-gloss, so we're just going with our base coat here to start the build-up process. Moving really quickly. It's a hot day, so this is going to dry in just a few minutes. The mixture I'm using is about 70-30. By the way, this is a really cheap Chinese gun that I bought several weeks ago, and I have not had any problems with it. It takes a lot of abuse, and it's already been through several projects with no issues. So long as you take the time to clean it, clean up all the parts, and scrub all the old lacquer off of them, it's worked just fine so far, and I'm really happy with it. Laying down the final coat here, nice and thick. And then this is the finish that we were able to achieve in just a couple of hours. Really easy, really painless. And this lacquer only needs a day to cure. It's already ready to be touched. So I'm not going to go crazy with any stuffing. This kit didn't include any, but I've got some on hand. I'm just going to add a few pieces to hopefully break up some standing waves. Nothing crazy there. You can see I've moved my crossover back quite a bit. We're ready to go ahead and hide our recesses here. I'm using some black latex paint. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. If you've only got a Sharpie on hand, go ahead and use that. We're just trying to hide the reveal behind our speakers. Time to make some pilot holes. Then we're going to go ahead and get these fastened in place with the gasket behind there. All of the fasteners in this kit appeared to be the same size, so that makes life a little bit easier. You don't have to sort everything out and guess what goes where. It's time for our port tubes at this point. I'm just adding a little bit of super glue, and then I'm going to press fit these into place. They're really snug on their own, so just a little bit of super glue should hold these in permanently. I'm going to go ahead and apply some gasketing for our back panel here. It is already airtight from the hot glue that we placed on the inside of the enclosure, but just as another layer of protection here. At this point, we're ready to insert our batteries. I saved them for last just in case we had any problems, but she fired right up with no issue, so it's time to get this put into place. So now that we're done with the assembly, let me just give some final thoughts on this before we wrap the video up. The only thing that stood out to me in the assembly as being a bit odd or difficult for a beginner would be the clipping and soldering of the crossover to the separate connector that then connects into the amp board. It's a little bit of a convoluted way of doing this. I realized that they did not have the pre-assembled crossover with the exact connector that needs to mate up to the amp board, so that's understandable. My fear is that someone who's not got experience in this might be a little confused by that. It's a little odd for even an experienced builder. Let's talk about the sound quality of this. I know that's what everyone wants to hear about. I did some listening tests and I'm not blown away by this. It does have a large response in the bass. I've not measured this to confirm that, but it's fairly obvious. It's very boomy in the bass department. So ultimately, I think that's probably going to be a positive for most casual listeners. I don't think that's actually a downside. It may have even been done on purpose. A lot of people are impressed by bass when it comes out of small packages, so I think that's who they're targeting with this. With that said, the reason I purchased this is to go into my shop where I will use it day to day rather than wheeling around my large stereo that I've had to remove and move and set in different places 100 times. It's getting old, so it's time for an all-in-one solution that I can pick up and set down without any connections, having to rewire everything, and so that's really what this is going to be for. I did mess around with some EQ, and with a little bit of EQ, I did get it to sound really good. Obviously, there's going to be limitations. You're not really going to get a big sound stage. There's no such thing as imaging on something like this. The drivers are just simply too close together to pull that off. But we knew that going into this. This is a Bluetooth kit. Nothing wrong with Bluetooth itself, but the fact that we're cramming it all into this portable container is going to cause some limitations, and that's to be expected. So with those things in mind, I think this is a fine project. I think it was a fun project. It's fairly easy. None of the parts are too big. Someone could easily do this by themselves with very few tools. You will want a soldering iron or some way to connect both connectors together permanently, so keep that in mind. But otherwise, I'm going to give this kit high marks. I'm really happy with it, and I'm looking forward to using it in the future. Everybody that's watched to the end, I really appreciate you watching this far. I've got some really exciting big builds coming up. Again, I'm not going to tell you exactly what we've got going on, but you don't want to miss it. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. I appreciate everyone that's watched this far, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.